Hello, my name's Andy. I'm the Ginger Pondkeeper. Welcome to episode 112. Yes, so it's a proper episode and not just a vlog. And I have some notes off screen. I'll be consulting, so you'll spot the edits. And yeah, I thought I'd better do a proper video once, and I'm going to do green screen through pretty much all of it. So you're probably watching something nice now, or future me will make me look silly and it'll just still be green. Hopefully not. Right, so I decided to make this episode after making episode 109 and thinking about what advice I would give to a new pond keeper, or someone who's just started a pond, or someone who ideally is still planning a pond. And I always felt reluctant to make this kind of video because I felt underqualified, really, and I still am, I guess, but I'm entering the 10th year of having a pond, and I've gone through a few adventures and missteps and problems, and so that kind of will add a perspective to it that may be different to other people's. But I thought I still feel I have something to share, and hopefully it will help some people. Now, I think some of these might be a bit different to some other people. And there'll be common ones, because there always are. But if this would be some use to some people, then that's a good thing. So number one, and probably probably slightly pretentious. I can't help but think it's slightly pretentious, but I think it's quite important, having had a pond myself. And that is, you're not just designing a container of water or somewhere where fish live. You're designing an experience. Bear with me, don't switch off. And that experience is twofold. There's one, the experience of the everyday maintaining and keeping that pond, all the work you've got to do to keep that pond running well. But there's also the other experience you have of going out into your garden and there being a body of water. And thinking about both of those when you plan your pond is really important. What kind of experience do you want to have? What kind of experience in terms of maintenance and hard labour are you able to do, or do you want to do? And that is really, really important when planning your pond. So you may know, if you've seen my recent videos about my filtration, I can never remember, that I have quite a lot of work to do in terms of keeping the pond clean because of some design decisions I've made. And some of them I might change if I made the pond again, but a lot I'd keep. And that's because of the other type of experience you have when you've got a pond. And that's the experience of just being in the garden with your pond. And for me, and again, I know I'm walking down pretension lane here a little bit, but let me try and explain what I was trying to achieve with my pond. So my pond is natural. No pond is really natural, but it would be called a natural pond because there's lots of plants. It's in the ground and it's not rectangular. So it kind of gets called natural, but no pond is really natural. And it certainly has native species. And I was trying to recreate something in that pond, that experience that I get when I'm at bodies of water. So I used to do a lot of fishing, but I also have liked visiting places where there's lakes and just walking around the lake. And there's a particular experience that, again, if you're an angler yourself, you probably can recognise, that when you go to a lake and you're watching a body of water, and sometimes it can look quite grey, and sometimes it can look really picturesque, but it can look like there's nothing living in it. And then you'll see some reeds move, and then you'll see a dark shape, and then you might see a massive carp or just some little fish, and you just observe them and spot them swimming and investigating and exploring their environment. Or you might walk around the corner and the lake might open up into this bay and the sun is shining, and you'll see a big shoal of rudd feeding in mid-water or off the surface. And that is what I've been trying to recreate. That experience is what I've been trying to recreate with my pond. And to a lesser or greater degree, I've both failed and succeeded, and I won't go into all the ways in which it doesn't hit that mark. There's a number of ways, the fish have to be less secretive than wild fish. They have to be more comfortable with humans being around, because otherwise they'd just be stressed all the time in such a small environment with me doing stuff around the pond all the time. So I have to work on getting them relaxed and comfortable in what is an artificial environment. And, you know, you can't have areas that are too shallow because that helps predators. See a further bit of advice. And so it never really hits that mark. But, you know, I love sitting in the garden. And as I've said before, sometimes I can be in the garden and I won't see my fish. Even with 5 relatively, you know, medium to large carp in my pond, I won't see any fish. And then as I sit there, then you'll start to see the lilies move. Or you'll hear some slurping somewhere in the pond and one of the carp will come up to the surface. And, you know, I think I still really like that experience. I still remember when I first dug the pond, 2 weeks after I dug it, it was really green water. And I hadn't yet put the fish in. And, well, I'd put the rudd in, but I hadn't put the carp. We had rudd and carp in a tank. There's all videos. I'll link them somewhere. I hadn't put the carp in, and I put the carp in, and they went down to they just disappeared in this green water. And then after about 10 minutes, I threw some pellets in and the carp came up and they sort of emerged out of it. And it was very natural. And I love that kind of experience. So although I really like having clear water and I like having something that looks good, I like that experience of it being a world where the life within it is slightly secretive. Again, I am well down pretension lane. I realise that, but that's kind of what I've always wanted from my pond and why my pond is like it is. You know, with all the constraints I've had to do because it's an unnatural body of water. It's not natural, and so you've really got to think both about. As I've said, I do quite a few hours each week keeping that pond healthy and clean. And you've got to think, well, what can I devote to that? And what kind of system will give me the level of work and the type of jobs that I want to do every week? And also, what experience do I want for my pond? You might want a pond that is both designed purely as a really efficient container of clean water, or you might is also like a picture frame to show off your fish. That might be the experience you want. So, but really think about that when you're designing the pond as much as you can. And I would always advise you to look at a whole range of different ponds, not just the kind of pond that you're drawn to, but also wildlife ponds, ponds like mine, ponds that are in ground, above ground, whatever, and just look at a whole range of ponds and get some ideas and think about the pros and cons of each. But always keep in mind the experience you're going to have living with your pond. So, number 2, and this is one that most people say when they're asked this question of what advice to a new pond keeper, and that is do your research. And it's not wrong. But I think what we've always got to think is, what does that actually mean, do your research? What does it mean? Does it mean going on Google? Does it mean going on YouTube? Does it mean going to forums? Does it mean joining a club? Does it mean going into a shop? Does it mean looking for scientific and academic research papers into topics? Does it mean talking to manufacturers? And obviously talking to other pond keepers? Well, in reality, it means all of those things. I think I mentioned in one of my vlog videos, which you may or may not have seen, that I don't like talking about specific things I use in my pond unless I've looked into the research, looked into the science essentially behind it, because I don't want to ever use the phrase do your research if I talk about a topic, because part of being a YouTuber means that for some people, you will be some of their research, because we all use YouTube to a lesser or greater degree to do research. And it's really useful. When I was trying to install an outdoor electrical socket, I got a YouTube video and followed it to the letter. I had my phone by me on a window ledge as I was doing it, and it worked really well. You can get a lot of really good information from YouTube. I hope you're getting something from this. But it's not the be-all and end-all, and Google isn't the be-all and end-all, and forums aren't, So go to those other places where you can find, proper scientific research, because there is quite a lot out there. Specifically for me, it's quite easy if I want to find research on carp, because there's a ton of scientific research into common carp. Not so much koi, but to common carp, because around the world, carp have an impact on the world. Either, yes, big carp fishing is big business. Carp farming for food is big business. And in many countries, carp are considered an invasive species. So that has an impact on the world around them. So there's lots of research into carp. And when you're looking at, how does the cold affect the carp, or stress affect the carp, or different illnesses affect the carp, there's a lot of research out there. So sometimes it's behind a paywall, but there are ways of getting around that, or at least finding other sources. So I would really recommend doing as many different types of research as you can into a specific subject, whatever it is, whether it's treatments, whether it's types of filters, whatever. And I would really, don't just stick to one source. Even if that source has really steered you in the right directions all the time, don't just stick to one source. And don't necessarily stick to the consensus. Because sometimes the consensus is a very scientific and experience-based and evidence-based consensus that gives you the right answer. And sometimes the consensus can draw you into received wisdom, by which I mean, because something is spoken about being the truth enough, it becomes the truth. And sometimes it is the truth, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes what is considered to be the right thing isn't necessarily the right thing, and isn't necessarily evidence-based or based on science or based on reality. To give you an example, outside of the pond world, I used to do bike racing. And we were always advised in the winter to do long, slow, low gear miles. And that was the best way of getting into form for the next season. And now if you see riders, some riders still do a fair amount of that, but some of the top riders in the world are riders that also ride cyclocross in the winter, which is, if you don't know, a high intensity, short training. So yeah, there's a lot of received wisdom in lots of different areas of life, in every hobby or work or whatever. And it's not always right, or it might not be right for you. So my advice when I'm saying do your research is do your research everywhere. Get as much information as you can from wildly different sources, not just the people who are considered experts, not just the people who have given you good advice in the past that's worked. Go everywhere. Find new things. Sometimes look at things that sound a bit wrong on the face of it, because sometimes some of the best ideas that we follow now, again, in lots of different things, were considered silly when they were first mentioned, and now they're good. So that's my advice. That's number 2. Right, number 3, and this is from harsh experience. Before you put a spade in the pond, before you cost your pond fully, before at least at the same time that you're thinking about filters and what fish you want in it, plan how you're going to protect your fish from predators. Build it in right from the start. Build it in from both the design of your pond and build it in from the size of your pond. Build it into the plants, the shape, everything about your pond. Build that in. And I say that because if you don't know, I lost some of my favourite fish, and the fish I've had the longest, virtually all of my non-fry fish that are in my pond 18 months or so ago, to an otter. And yeah, I've since done things to try and stop them getting in. Now in my pond, I've got 2 types of protection against predators. I've got a fence around the pond, which again, I would never say anything's 100%, because you will find a predator somewhere that's got around almost everything that you could think of putting in, including electrics and whatever. I've got a fence right on the edge of the pond, which stops the heron getting into a position easily. It has to do a lot of very complicated problem solving to get into a position to hunt the fish, even if they let it catch them. It's very difficult for a heron. So I do get visited by herons, but they come a few times and they don't come back, which I think is them kind of giving up, I hope. So that's what I've got for the herons. And so for the otters, what I've done is I've laid concrete slabs underneath my fencing, so they can't dig and get underneath my fence, and my fences are technically, to all research and advice, too tall without anything for them to grip on to climb up. So they can't tunnel under. They don't really tunnel anyway, but they can't hollow out the ground under to get under the fence and get into my garden, and they can't get over. And in the last 18 months, I don't think otters have come by because I've got a camera out watching them. But I've not had problems with otters. Again, I'm not saying it's 100%. I think by and large, if you've got a fully enclosed garden where your pond is, I would suggest making the garden otter-proof is easier than making your pond otter-proof. Whereas to combat herons, it's easier to make your pond heron-proof than it is to make your garden heron-proof. Obviously, that's a wild generalisation for both of them. And when I did my video on how much my pond will cost if I made it now, I worked out it cost, I can't remember, it's terrible, £300 to £400, let's say £400 on all the things that I've chosen to protect my garden and therefore my fish from predators. But you need to build it in from the start. Don't, think, I'll do that later on and then end up losing your fish. That's advice number 3. Number 4, there's no right way to have a pond. There's no piece of equipment that you have to have. You'll hear people say you have to have this or that. And while some pieces of equipment may be objectively better and they may make your life easier, you don't need to have them. As a consequence of not having them, you may have to do more work in a different way. But there's no shape of pond you need to have. There's no type of pond you need to have. There's no type of filtration you need to have. Your setup, by and large, only needs one thing, or only needs to be one thing. It needs to be a healthy environment for your fish. That's it. And I would argue safe as well, but that's all it needs to be. How you get there to that healthy environment is completely up to you. Everything is open to you and how you do that. That is your choice. Now, you can learn from other people on how they do it. So I'll give you an example. Some people will say, some people won't, lots of, very reasonable pond keepers will say, you don't need to have a bottom drain. It's just easier if you do. They're more efficient. And they're right, but you don't need to have one to have big messy fish like carp in your pond. There's ways around it. You don't need to have a tempest filter. You don't need to have a UV. But they might make your life easier if you have them. But there's other ways of addressing those issues. And you just need to find the right way for you. Because ultimately, like my first piece of advice, is at the end of the day, it's your pond. You're paying for it. You're putting the work in. You're having the stress, and you will have stress. So it's entirely up to you. At the end of the day, you do you. Number 5. This is a little bit do as I say, not as I do, because I've been meaning to do this consistently for years and never quite got there. But I would say it would be a good idea, and that is keep a record or a diary of your pond. And that's for a number of reasons, really. Firstly, things are often repeated, and if you keep a record, you'll notice that pattern and things will develop for you, and that will help you to predict when things might happen, and it will help you understand why things happen. So trying to think of a good example, that I tend to get algae in the autumn, and it was a very consistent pattern, and it wasn't driven by how much I fed in the summer. It wasn't driven by anything. All of the different combinations of stocking of fish I've got, I've tended to get algae in the autumn. And I think it's very reasonable to suggest that is because the plants are starting to die off then. So they're eating up less nitrate and less of the stuff that grows plants. But my fish are still eating quite a lot in the autumn. And if you go fishing, you'll know that fish do, even as the weather starts to drop, very often fish will start feeding more as it kind of triggers winter's approaching, put some weight on kind of deal. And so there'll be more nitrate in your pond, but the plants will be eating less of it. And I'm not very good at spotting patterns without a bit of help. And so I would keep a diary, keep a record of that. And the other good reason for it is things, good and bad, can develop over time. So something you do in the winter might have benefits in the summer or negatives in the summer. So you might change a bit of filtration in the winter, but you might not see the benefits to September as you've been feeding for it more for a consistent length of time, and you realise actually things are working really well. So it's really important to be able to connect the dots, and without, certainly for me, without having a good record, I wouldn't be able to do that. And that kind of brings me to the last good reason. I have an awful memory. I really do. Without having a YouTube channel, I would not remember when I bought certain fish and when they put them in the pond, or when I got a certain filter. I can't remember that stuff off the top of my head. I know some people do start a channel to have a record, have a diary of their pond, but I've never really done, I didn't do it for that. But yeah, it's really useful just as a memory aid, really. So I would really advise it, even though I don't do it very well, is have a diary or some kind of record. Number 6, go easy on yourself. It doesn't matter how much you research, how much you read up, talk to people, plan, double plan, sort your budgets, get everything covered, learn everything you need to learn, do everything you need to do, work as hard as you possibly can. Something will still probably go wrong. And I really doubt there's a pondkeeper anywhere as good and as competent, as experienced and knowledgeable as they may seem, who haven't had some kind of disaster. It's partly because some of it's out of your control, and partly there are just lessons to learn, and some of them you have to learn yourself. And, you know, in some ways this hobby is quite simple, but in other ways it's very complicated, and there's a steep learning curve. And again, it doesn't matter how much you learn or how hard you work, you've got to go through that curve. So when things inevitably go wrong, don't beat yourself up about it. Learn, understand why it happened, and then try and put it right so things don't happen again. So I lost a ton of fish in winter because all my filtration was outside, and it was the beast from the east winter. And I lost fish to otters because I hadn't protected the garden from otters. So you learn, you do something different, but don't beat yourself up about it. Everyone would have been there to a lesser or greater degree. And sometimes on YouTube, sometimes people on YouTube show everything, warts and all, but sometimes people don't always show their disasters. I think I've shown 90% of my, little mishaps. I haven't shown all of them because I didn't think there was any benefit to someone else in showing them. Or sometimes I was just too fed up to make a video about it. But I think, sometimes there's a sanitized view on YouTube of what people's ponds are like. There's a lot of honest people out there, but sometimes there's a sanitized view. So don't compare yourself to other people. Comparison is the thief of joy, without a doubt. You will get there, and sometimes you have to go through some of those rough times and lessons that you have to learn to get there. So, as I say, don't beat yourself up. Finally, number 7. Don't know why I chose 7, but I went with 7 and I'm sticking to it. Number 7 is, and this is I would say about 60% science-based and 40% it's just how I am really as a person. But I think the best thing for your pond, and therefore your fish, is stability and consistency over perfection. There's a real thing in this hobby, probably more, and I don't mean this as a criticism to koi keepers, more in the koi world, because they are always kind of heading for this all the time for reasons. Koi sometimes seem like they need it, but there's a drive for perfection, perfect pH, perfect TDS, perfect nitrate levels, perfect everything. And I actually think sometimes you can chase that and cause problems in the chasing. And sometimes having a really stable system with consistent approaches, with consistent water chemistry, even if it's not perfect, is sometimes better in the long term, both for you and your fish. Now, obviously, if we're talking about a toxic environment, then that's different. You've got to chase healthiness, and that's fine. Chasing, good health and maybe good water clarity, if that's what you want, that's okay. But I would still suggest that that you get into a really good routine that gives you a non-toxic environment, a healthy environment, but that you can keep to consistently, that gives you stability in your water chemistry, is better than chasing perfection in your water chemistry. And that is the final piece of advice I'll offer in this 7 bits of advice I would give to a new or prospective pond keeper. I hope some of it's been helpful. If you disagree with me, feel free to disagree. I don't mind. I don't mind at all. It's been nice to do a video that isn't a vlog, even though I'm in the garage, as you may know if you've watched my vlogs. My green screen is in the garage, as you might be able to hear the cars. This is a relatively quiet room, but it's not silent. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. If you have, please subscribe. Please look around the channel if you're new, because there's a ton of vlogs. There's a ton of other videos, other episodes. And yeah, think about subscribing. You may or may not know that I am heading to 1,000, optimistically. I'm at 918 today, which means I am 82 away. Yeah, 82 away from 1,000, which of course is a point where I might get monetized. I may not if I don't have enough views. If I get 1,000 subscribers but not enough views, that'll be sad. But anyway, share it. That'll be useful. If you like this, share it around. I'll do a bit of sharing, but if you could share too, that'll be great. And I really appreciate it. I really do. Thank you for watching. And yeah, like, share, subscribe. Thank you very much. And I will see you next time.